Hello, and welcome to the News from the Real World video podcast, where we dig a little deeper into news and current events from the world of arts and entertainment. I'm joined this week by Lauren Mills, graduate third-year scenic designer.
Hello.
Margo Gray, first-year director extraordinaire.
Hello.
Kat Meyendorf, second-year production stage manager.
Hi.
And I'm Matt Zomar, third-year graduate technical director. All right, guys, let's jump right into it. First article this week is about SeaWorld, and the name of the article is SeaWorld Orlando announces the grand opening of Antarctica, Empire of the Penguins. This was written by Dominic Yost, writing for the themeparkinsider.com, and this was one of our student-selected articles with 10 comments totaling this week. So SeaWorld is opening a brand new addition to their theme park this spring called Antarctica, Empire of the Penguins. And what it is, it's this huge, monumental, just multimedia, just fully immersive experience where you're not just walking in and seeing penguins in a tank or walking through some corrals and you get to see them behind the glass. Like, you are in it. So you're, like, it's almost like if you imagine the Universal Orlando Studios tour where you're riding on the car and you see King Kong and Jaws. You do that, but with penguins and videos and awesome stuff. So this little website has some videos on it. What do you guys think? Did you guys take a look at the penguins?
I'm just not that interested. I mean, it just, okay, when you say Universal Studios tour, that to me sounds really exciting, but I just don't know the penguins. I mean, it's not Jurassic Park, right? We're talking about penguins. What do they do? They wear a little tuxedo. That's it, right? So what's the big deal about penguins? Would you go to this park?
Penguins are awesome. That's what is exciting about this exhibit. I mean, a more submersive experience with the animal, I think, is kind of a fascinating approach to it. And I don't know that it's been done. I think everyone likes penguins. I think the opportunity to get a little bit closer is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, one of the big selling points was that you can actually walk around with the penguins. So they've built a set, which looks like glaciers and icebergs, and there's pools, and you can see the penguins jump and, coming out of the water. And you're there walking around, and I don't know, it just seems like it's a new approach to both entertainment and zoology. So it's like they're combining themed entertainment, which is a big business in America, really around the world, and the zoos. So I don't know if it's the first time it's been done, but there's a lot of firsts for this production. So they're saying that this is the coldest theme park in the world. They have all this technology to make it chilly and dry, unlike, the hot, humid Orlando. So these penguins are going to be living close to what they are in the wild. All the water, all the media technology. I don't know. It seems like it's going to be pretty cool. One of the things that's interesting is if you look at the videos, they kind of give you a behind-the-scenes look at, the graphic design of the penguins and how the animators, teamed up with the zoologists to try to not humanize these penguins too much or try to not make them too much like, Disney cartoons or, penguins are, big movies right now, things like that. I thought that was interesting that these people are doing the research not to create a theme park, but to try to, do the illusion of bring the public to Antarctica.
To bring the public to what?
To Antarctica, where the penguins live.
There's also an app. So if you can't make it to Orlando SeaWorld, there is a Become an Arctic Explorer app that you can download on your phone. If you really love penguins so much that you need an app on your phone to interact with them, Lauren.
I love penguins that much. I will download this app.
I mean, my question about it is, at what point does this become, like, exploiting the animals for a theme park? Like, because a zoo kind of, for the most part, they're behind glass and they're, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. At a theme park with a ride and stuff, it's a little weird.
Yeah, I hope they have some consideration to keep the animals safe and away from the grabby hands of little children.
Well, you never know. Maybe the penguins like this too. The problem is we don't speak penguin, so until we learn, we just have to go check them out there in SeaWorld Orlando. All right. Kat, why don't you tell us about what's happening with Sherlock Holmes?
So this article is entitled, "Don't Imagine That You Can Bully Me." It's written by Scott Monty, and it's on the Baker Street blog. So this article talks about a noted Sherlockian scholar named Leslie Klinger, who's filed a lawsuit against the Arthur Conan Doyle estate because he thinks that the characters Sherlock Holmes and John Watson are part of the public domain. Now, the weird thing is that they are part of the public domain in the UK and have been for about 20 years. So this whole thing is about copyright protection in the US and whether, because most of Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories are actually in the public domain everywhere because they were published before 1923, there are 10 stories that were published after that have Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And so because of this, the estate is claiming that the characters themselves are still belong to the state and other authors cannot start using them in their own works. So I'm curious what you guys think of this. I know we've talked about copyright a lot in this podcast. Is this, I don't know, what do you guys think? Is Sherlock Holmes something that everyone should just be able to use?
Yes. And I think the issue for me here is that the characters in their entirety are established in the work that is not under copyright anymore. These last 10 stories don't do a whole lot to add to the character that has already been established in the work. So I think that the limitations that they're setting on this are really restrictive, but I also think they're without merit to a certain degree. If the characters of themselves are whole, as they stand before the copyright has expired, in the work that is expired under copyright, then I think this should be exempt. I don't think this should be an issue.
I also think this is another ridiculous example of American copyright laws being totally overboard. Because the Conan Doyle estate is like some distant relatives. They had sold the copyright for a time. They got it back. There's a few other claimants. So like, for example, when they made the Guy Ritchie, those movies, they in fact paid licensing rights to 2 different estates just to get rid of them. Just so that they wouldn't have to deal with the legal issues, because there are so many kind of weird claims to Sherlock Holmes, who's 125 years old. So it's ridiculous, I think, that people are still trying to commodify that idea. Doyle himself didn't protest other people using the Holmes character even in his lifetime. In 1903, there was a Sherlock Holmes board game. Doyle did not object to things like that, and I think it's really silly that 125 years later, people are objecting to people using the character, which really should, 125 years is long enough, I feel.
It's interesting to see, too, how this, in other literary worlds, this is not an issue. So they're just released I think, Great and Powerful Oz, whatever it is. And the name of the author who wrote the original story, his name escapes me.
L. Frank Baum.
Yeah, L. Frank Baum sort of said, hey, these are the characters I created, and here, use them. And so, like, people wrote stories, and there's, like, bookshelves of Oz stories. And what makes Sherlock any different than Wizard of Oz? Is it because of the family? Is it because of the legality that we enforce? Is it because of the copyright? I don't know. It just seems a shame that these characters that the world really loves and can really, really enjoy get wrapped up in all this red tape and paperwork. It's
on the other hand, though, I'm going to have an unpopular opinion here. On the other hand, I don't necessarily see a problem with the estate trying to protect the characters as they were written. Because the problem becomes, as soon as a character is out in the public domain, you can make it do what you want.
Yep.
All of a sudden, Sherlock Holmes is traveling through space and fighting aliens.
And there are stories about that, but I think that's okay. You know what? Because that's more artistically rich experience. I don't think that harms the original character in any way. That Neil Gaiman and his stories about Cthulhu and Sherlock Holmes, which a lot of enjoy, enjoy, but would Arthur Conan Doyle have written that? No. But art is not your pet. It's your kid. It grows up. It talks back to you. It's out of your control once you put it out there. And it didn't used to be this way. People, in classic literature, borrowed from each other all the time, used each other's characters, had a dialogue within literature that I think we've really lost, because the American idea is that your art is a commodity and you want to hold on to it and you want to be able to sell it, which I think is very unhealthy for just artistic culture.
It pushes people to come up with other things. Instead of, I can use Sherlock Holmes in a story, great, I'll write about Sherlock Holmes. What if I instead am forced to come up with something completely new?
The Sherlock Holmes that we see in modern adaptations is not the one that we see in Hound of the Baskervilles. It's a derivation of the original character. And I think that in and of itself is worthwhile. And I don't think that they're tarnishing Conan Doyle's vision for the story or the character. I think they're adapting it and, updating it.
Yeah. And postmodern art is all about adapting existing forms and playing with what's already there. So yes, people can come up with things of their own, but I think 125 years later, it's ridiculous to say that you can't use material that's already so in the cultural consciousness.
Yeah, I think it's an issue of sort of just the world's getting faster, business is getting more important, people are more concerned with money, so we're getting into these snags. We've talked about it a lot before, we'll probably be talking about it again. So there's a greater issue here at work is copyright, business, art, finances, hairy stuff. We haven't seen the end of it, I'm sure. A frequent subject of articles that post on the blog are professional advice. A lot of students here going out into the real world looking for work, trying to flex our professional skills. Margo, why don't you tell us about some of the things that showed up this week?
I'd love to, man. We have 2 articles from the Come Recommended blog. One is Cover Letters, 10 Tips to Writing a Successful One by Chris Martin, the most poorly phrased title in this week's section. And by Brittany Schlechter, Making Your Business Cards Social Media Friendly. So the Cover Letter, 10 Tips for Writing a Successful One article is just 10 tips for things you should do in a cover letter. I think they're pretty all common sense. However, there was some the comments on the green page seem to say that there was some new news in there. So if you're writing your cover letters, maybe think about some of these tips, mentioning any connections you have, even if it's just an informational interview that you've had with someone. The brevity is important. That you need to find some way to distinguish yourself, to customize it, that sort of thing. So those are pretty basic as you're getting a job. I think the brevity one really rang true for me when I read cover. I hardly ever read the entire cover letter. I don't. but if like when people apply to my theater company, I look at the resume first, and sometimes read the whole cover letter. Especially if it's long. If it's like an entire typed page, that's a lot. I don't have the 90 seconds that would take. The other article is about making your business card social media friendly, and so one of the suggestions was using QR codes so that you can provide a direct link and people don't have to type in your website or whatnot. So that seemed to have some interesting suggestions about using business cards and how they're still useful even in a world where we mostly communicate electronically. So were there any tips in here either about cover letters or business cards that you found either useful or that you thought were off the mark?
I think I'm a little bit confused by the connection between a business card and social media, and I understand where they're coming from, but I'm also personally uncomfortable with this assumption that if you do put a QR code or something on the back, that someone on the other end has the technology to use that. I think that's assuming a level of stature that I'm not comfortable with. So that's something that came up in my thinking about it.
I mean, I don't think putting a QR code on the back is assuming. Yes, it's assuming that whoever's receiving it has the means to read it, but also I don't know if it's an assumption. I think it's more of a convenience thing, that if that person that you handed it to happens to have an iPhone that can scan the QR code and pull up the website, it's a bonus. And if somebody doesn't have an iPhone that can't, or doesn't have a smartphone, then they'll look up your website the normal way. I don't necessarily think it's an assumption. I think it's just an added bonus.
Yeah, I would say put the information somewhere other than just in the QR code. Like put the actual website or your Twitter handle or whatever you're linking to in addition to the QR code, because sometimes you don't have an iPhone handy.
We talk in here before about how to separate yourself from the other applicants, and the resume, or the cover letter and the business card, two right away first impressions. So make it short, make it sweet, make it good. And also make it interesting. One of the tips that I never thought of, which is maybe I might try, is look at the shape of your business card. So stay away from this size square, but maybe make it a circle, or they had a little one that was a soccer ball, which is, for soccer players, I guess. And there's just something you don't think of. And I wonder if we should not be looking at this as a change in how we do it, but just a natural progression, right? Information is a commodity now. It's all about getting information out there. Is this how we have to do it from now on? Maybe. Yeah.
I think about the shape, that one I disagreed with a little, just because it's so much more difficult to put it in your wallet with the other business cards that, if I have something that won't fit, maybe I'll just throw it away.
Round business cards drive me crazy because I can't put them in my wallet. If I get one, I throw it away. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are anal like me and will.
I mean, I think the point of that was just to make sure you're tailoring it to who you want to receive it. So if you're at a very, professional business meeting, maybe not having a normal business card that they can clearly fit in their wallet is the way to go. But if you're, applying to, I don't know, some new, very like technologically friendly company, maybe having something that interesting is a bonus.
Well, I think in terms of personalizing, if I'm handing a business card to someone in person, one of the things they suggested was writing something on it. So if you are showing them that you're, for example, if I have a show up, I'm not going to print that on my business cards, but I might write on the back of it, like, you know, this is my show, playing it here on these dates. Here's my, so that they see that I'm kind of personalizing it for them. I think then also people are more likely to keep something that they know something has been written on for them. Or if I'm sending it with a cover letter, you know, so, you know, thanks for checking out my website, or, you know, whatever, so that there's something handwritten on it too. So that's another way to personalize.
Good tips, but applicant beware, because you might end up with one of these next jobs. This article was titled, "Are Unpaid Fashion Interns the Oppressed Housewives of Today?" Meredith Lepore is writing for thejanedoe.com. This is one of our editor-suggested picks. So what this article was, it was a brief exploration about the fashion industry's use of unpaid interns. And it was specifically, I think it was referencing a study by the HRMC, which is kind of like the IRS for the United Kingdom, into 100 different fashion houses and their misuse of interns, how they not paying them. And the connection was made sort of saying that here we have young fashion interns, which mostly women, young women, mostly from who have another source of income, so either their parents are helping support them. So they're working these jobs, but they're not getting paid, and it's kind of the assumed expectation. Like, of course, we're not going to pay these interns. And, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to work them 60 hours a week, and they're going to do a full-time job, and that's great. Thanks. Get out of here when you're done. And the connection was made to, you know, 50s housewives. As women were first entering the workforce, they were sort of like, you're a woman. Why should we expect to pay you? You're going to be supported by your husband. So what do you guys think? Is this a women's labor issue? Is this an intern issue? What's going on here?
I mean, I think it's an intern issue in general. Like I think we've talked about this a couple times, that all industries now are utilizing this intern kind of phenomena that's been happening the last 10 years or so. And they're getting these interns who are usually young professionals just out of college, just out of grad school, who are looking for their kind of intro job to the field. And they're basically exploiting them and making them do a job for free. And so now I know there are a couple lawsuits up in the Supreme Court about this, and with different companies that are defending the fact that they have these people who they aren't paying. And I don't disagree. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I think that I believe that the connection to like 50s housewives, I think that's a bit thin, because I think it definitely varies from industry to industry, the gender of it, but I don't think they're being exploited because they're females. I think one of the sort of demographic questions for me is sort of cost of opportunity. They talked about, if they're not getting paid, of course, these people have to pay their rent and eat somehow. So usually that's their parents. If your parents can't afford to support you while you're taking a great opportunity for some unpaid internship, then folks who are maybe a little less well off, maybe have some more student debt, aren't getting these types of opportunities. And so that's when you get industries that have sort of less demographic diversity. But I mean, I think the law is pretty clear, and there was a New York Times article about this a few years ago, about these Department of Labor rules for internships, and it's pretty clear that there's almost no way you can be working full-time for a for-profit company for free and have that be legal. So I'll be interested to see the outcome of these legal battles, but I think it's pretty clear that that's it's not illegal.
I also have some statistics to kind of put this in perspective for us. So 3/4 of the 10 million students in four-year degree programs will work as an unpaid intern before they graduate. 1/3 to 1/2 of those interns are not paid. That's a lot.
Yeah, nonprofits have a little more leeway, so I think sometimes in the theater, I mean, have any of you ever worked an unpaid internship for the theater?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Good for you.
I have done another
Three out of
internship.
four of us. But because if you're working for a nonprofit, there are different rules because you can be classified as volunteer. But if you're working for a for-profit company, I mean, there are these 6 criteria that you have to meet from the U.S. Department of Labor. One is which that there's no immediate advantage or like material benefit to the employer. So it's pretty clear that these people who are, getting coffee, making copies, doing whatever else that they're doing that contributes to the daily work of the fashion house is not appropriate for
So
internship.
it's really important, I think, that we hold these companies accountable for it. It's not the problem of the intern. It's the companies that need to be more responsible to the people that are working for them.
And I think that's what this is a major indicator of this. It's not just fashion. It's just how companies look at interns as a labor source in general. And I think it's very fitting to, like you said, like 3 of us were unpaid theater interns. Nonprofit industry, especially, can depend on interns because it's a cheap source of labor. And should it be? I mean, maybe where's the line between just because someone is a profit company, nonprofit company, like the local 8, the IATSE strike in Philadelphia at Suzanne Roberts Theater. One of the issues that the local there was kind of protesting was, in general, their bargaining rights was specifically how this theater company was treating their interns. So it's an issue more and more. And I think cases like this are going to expose it and also say, hey, legally you should do this, this, and this, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
In 2 weeks, the USITT conference rolls into Milwaukee. It's a week-long event of conference, panel discussions, exhibits, student competitions, design presentations. It's a great conference for theater practitioners and professionals. Lauren, why don't you tell us about one of the speakers that got lined up?
Yes, absolutely. So Donyale Werle is a scenic designer. She's speaking at USITT in a couple of weeks. She won the Tony Award in 2012 for her scenic design for Peter and the Starcatcher, which was made entirely out of recyclable materials. So she's going to give a talk about making theater environmentally friendly. Currently, this is a practice that she incorporates into her own work. She's also the pre-production co-chair of the Broadway Green Alliance, which is an organization dedicated to making Broadway more green. What do you guys think about this movement? What do you think about this growing desire to make theater more environmentally friendly?
I mean, I think it's interesting. I just don't. No, I think I agree with her to some extent, because if you look, even like when we do a strike here, you look and we fill a dumpster with wood and steel and all this stuff, and it's a 20-foot by 10-foot dumpster that we fill to the brim, and we've used it for less than a month. We got it delivered 3 weeks ago, and all of a sudden we're throwing it all out. So I think I'm trying to think of another industry that does things like that specifically, and off the top of my head, I can't think of one. And so I think there's something there that somehow, if there's a way to reuse things, it's interesting, I think.
This also goes beyond just producing scenery. So there's a few different areas that the Broadway Green Alliance focuses on, one of them being production. Donyale Werle has been a great pioneer in bringing this recyclable aesthetic to the theater, so that she's designing with this aesthetic in mind, which I think is one point. But they're also looking at things like venue use. How do we, reduce our carbon footprint when we're on tour, that kind of thing. So this extends well beyond just the physical material in the theater.
I mean, but in terms of material, she was talking about not only recyclable, but recycled materials that you're using that came from something else. And I think part of what's really magical about theater usually is transformation. We're taking something and we're making it into something else. And I've seen some really great examples of using materials, even when you're being really kind of obvious about it. Like there's a company in Chicago called Strange Tree Group that did a set a few years ago that was all recycled materials, but it was sort of like trash that they had a brick wall that was made out of VHS tapes that they'd spray painted brown, which looked perfect. They looked like bricks. And they had railings that were made out of old shoes that they'd spray painted, like ladies' shoes that they'd spray painted and glued together, and it gave this really great architectural feel. So thinking about ways that those sort of materials can be used, I think is something that theater has the power to do really well. And so, I mean, that won't work for every situation, but I think it can work.
Right, I'm curious about that, because I think this is an extremely important conversation to be having. I think it's great that USITT is sponsoring the speaker, because it's like the one time a year where a lot of people can be in a room talking and hearing all these things. But I'm curious, I'll ask it specifically to you, but weigh in as well. Does this change the way we design, right? So right now, I'm assuming, I don't know, we design from the idea and up. And so the material selection is determined on what the thing is. If this conversation leads to thinking about recycling, thinking about sustainable materials, thinking about other ways to approach it. Does that mean that design now shifts to, let's use what we have, let's use what we can recycle, let's use what is available, cheaper or renewable, and does that change a design?
You know, honestly, I don't think so. I saw her design for Peter and the Starcatcher, and it was stunning. And my interpretation of the design is not that that she was thinking about, you know, what material would fit this. It was about, you know, what's the idea and how can we make these materials fit into it. So I think she was still very much designing, you know, from the ground up, from the design up, with this, you know, aesthetic, this recyclable, salvaging idea in the design as a dramaturgical concept.
Okay.
So that's my interpretation of it.
I think it could go either way depending on the designer. Like even now that, you know, all designers design differently, and I've known some designers who do start saying, I want to use steel. I want everything to be steel. And they start with, I know what I want it to be made out of, and go from there. So I think, I don't think this idea changes that. I think it just depends entirely on the designer and how they think.
Well, I think it's an issue that can be approached from all areas of theater, whether you're a director or a scenic designer, or, you know, even a sound designer thinking about, or a technical director thinking about the materials, or if you're a manager thinking about carbon footprint on tour, that sort of stuff. It's not just something, as you said, that's about material, but it's really sort of about mindset, because as you mentioned, we have a lot of waste in our industry that you don't always see other places. So I think it's definitely worth thinking about for the penguins.
Save the penguins.
Yeah, I bet you they're going to throw that away.
Yeah.
Big conversation, big issues. I think we're going to be hearing a lot about it in the future for sure, or at least I would like to hear more about this. I don't know, let's jump into it. Let's hear about Frankenweenie.
Great. So this next article is entitled The Stop Motion Puppets of Frankenweenie. It is by Norman Chan, and it's on tested.com. So mostly the article is a video, and it just has this little blurb of text underneath it. So this is about Tim Burton's movie came out, I think, last year called Frankenweenie. It was nominated this year for an Academy Award, and Tim Burton is kind of known for his stop motion animation, and so this short video it's only about 4 minutes long, goes into a little bit of detail about these stop motion characters that the team of artists and engineers have created, and how they go about filming with these things. And I found this really fascinating because I had no idea. I still thought they did all stop motion with like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, like from the 80s. I still thought that was how they did it. Clearly it's not. They now have these super detailed and intricate understructures that, you know, can make these animals and characters move like, you know, they do on screen. And they have like interchangeable faces if they can't get them to move. So they have all these different ways to make these characters express emotion and move. And I just thought it was really cool. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is this theater? Is this related to, does this have any implications for theater? Like what?
I mean, I thought the artistry here was stunning, and that's something that I really did not appreciate about stop motion until very recently. But they had over 200 puppets and sets for this film, and they shoot at 24 frames per second, which means that each character must be repositioned 24 times to get 1 second of film. So it takes a massive amount of time, a massive amount of thought, a massive amount of skill to get these, you know, full-length movies together, and I thought that was absolutely stunning.
Yeah, I think it's, when I was watching it, it seemed like something out of another time because we're so used to digital animation now that the idea of taking something and physically moving it to put it on film seems like, wow, that's so quaint. Right, but that's what, I mean, but that's what we do in theater, right, is that we make things happen, and these aren't happening in real time, obviously, they're setting it, but they need to be able to move in a certain way. And so I think there are still things that we do in theater, you know, when you think about the way that we do puppetry, or, you know, if you're talking about like toy theater or any of that sort of stuff, that you need to have this level of really intricate craft. So it seemed like something that us theater artists appreciate.
Certainly, and I think this is another great example of what we do in sort of borrowing other technologies or borrowing other things from other worlds. And so the guy who described his job title as head of the Puppet Hospital kept talking about this. Was it these ball and socket joints? And so that they showed the opening of a section of the dog, and they saw all the different joints in the dog and the things the dog can do. And I wondered who had the idea to think of this creature and think of these mechanical joints and to think of these tolerances and everything. Like, that was just so cool and so exciting to see that, like, ingenuity is alive and well in the arts, and we don't get to think about it too much, which is great.
Tim Burton is the master. I hope he continues to do this. His stop motion is beyond ridiculous.
I think he will. I mean, he does it well. He's done it before. I think we're going to see more of him, which is great. So it'll be exciting to see where things go. Something else also that was pretty exciting that showed up on the Green Page this week was this floating stage in Malaysia.
Yes. Okay.
Singapore.
Singapore, Malaysia. There is a floating stage. It is 390 feet long and 270 feet wide. The stadium can hold about 30,000 people. And they have a variety of events on this floating platform. They have everything from soccer matches to concerts to theatrical performances. And it's really the biggest in the world outside of the Bregenz Festival in Austria, if you're familiar with that. Does this have any implications for us as artists? What do you guys think of this?
I think the technology behind it is really cool. A floating stage sounds awesome. I question whether it then becomes about the floating stage instead of what's on the floating stage. Especially because, it's on this beautiful lake in the middle of this city. It's beautiful if you look at the pictures. But then does it become, I'm going to watch this beautiful sunset and have some, singing in the background?
What's wrong with that?
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think that's sort of a way of looking at live entertainment and how it ties in the atmosphere to it, which we deal with on a much smaller scale in theater for sure. We think about the space that the set is in. We think about found spaces. But I think we saw another great example this past year of the Olympic Stadium that they built and designed for the Olympics, for the opening and closing ceremonies. And it was the stadium itself became part of the show. And I think that's what they're doing here is like, so you can go, you can sit, and you can see this show. And you see the floating stage, but then you see the city behind it. You see the stars. You see the skyline. You see the planes coming in the airport. You see all the other things. And I think it's great that they made the show bigger than the stage itself by making the stage so big and floating, which is cool.
Are you guys familiar with the Bregenz Festival? Mm-hmm. It's an opera festival, for those of you who are not familiar with it, on a lake in Vienna, in Lake Constance in Austria. And this is a festival that started in 1946, but they do these massive sets in the middle of the lake, and they're spectacular. The actors look tiny on these things. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the best parallel that I can,
yeah, and I think those, if you haven't seen pictures of it, Google it, because it's beautiful. But this looked, for some reason, less impressive to me, or maybe it just looked so commercial with this, the brightly colored seating that's on land, which also seems to be like 50 feet away from the stage. It's very far. And so it's because of the scale of it, it seemed to me that you lost some of the benefits of having it be this floating stage, and really you were just left with the idea of the novelty of it.
Right, and I think that's more what I meant, that it just, looking at the pictures, it just seems like an indulgence.
Seems gimmicky.
In a way that, look, we want a floating stage, here's a floating stage, isn't that cool? Rather than using it for...
Right. The opera festival seemed like they were using it really effectively, and those sets are built to really incorporate the... Whereas this... I don't know if it's a set up to be a soccer field or what that is, but it was just like, well, that's floating.
But I mean, even watching sports, like to bring it, like to take it out of theater for a while, just as using it as a, stage and arena for something. It's just not, you're really far 60 feet away. You can't even see the soccer ball. And then the soccer ball goes into the lake. And then what do you do? Like, it just, I don't know. It's cool, but not, yeah.
Not as cool as penguins. Actually, neither is very cool.
Some bad news for 3D printers, something we talk about all the time. How big business is stymying the maker's high-resolution, colorful innovations? So this was an article from Wired.com. Joseph Flattery is writing it. So 3D printers, everyone has one. They're getting smaller, cheaper. The maker, do-it-yourself industry has really exploded. 3D printers are everywhere, right? Everyone is modeling and doing 3D printers. So the idea was that eventually everyone's going to have one of these in their home, just like everyone has an inkjet printer in their home. So everyone can make pictures in their home. Now everyone can print 3D objects and model in their home, and there's software developed for this. There's software developed for children. Like, this is great. 3D printers are moving forward faster than we can ever imagine. Except the law came in. Again, the law, always with the law. So there was this company who sort of was at the very beginning of this 3D printer technology, 3D Systems, and they patented all of these technologies that are responsible for the 3D printing in itself. And so what a lot of these other smaller companies have been doing is they are using expired patents in their machines, and that's how they're making their machines. So they're these sort of offshoot companies, which are, MakerBot is one of the big ones right now, probably one of the biggest ones in the do-it-yourself movement, who are using these expired patents to make their machines, and that's what these makers are doing. And 3D Systems are saying, hold on, stop. It's expired patents, but there's also some other patents we have, and you are infringing on patent rights, so you need to stop doing this. And so they took this one company, Form Labs, who started a Kickstarter campaign to, make a very cheap, affordable, but high-resolution 3D printer in your home. They took them to court. And so what this means is that maybe 3D printers are not going to be in everyone's house in 2 weeks because patents stop the technology from being possible. What do you guys think? Are you upset about not getting a 3D printer for Christmas this year?
Well, yes, I'm very upset. In general, I'm upset about copyrights and patents. Patents are something you may have noticed, podcast listeners. Patents are this huge problem in the technology industry. It seems like these seem to be actual reasonable uses of patents, but it's kind of unclear. Often patents are written to be so vague as so that their holders can come after people, and there are companies who do nothing but buy patents and then sue people. They don't produce anything. They just try to get money from other people who are using these technologies that are described so vaguely that anything where you click on an icon could be described under this patent. So there's just like these ridiculous uses of patent law in the United States. I'm not sure if this is a case of that, but there's got to be a better way to do business in this country. I've mixed feelings about being able to prevent people from working along certain lines because they know that they're not going to be able to bring these ideas to fruition.
I mean, that's what I struggle with, is that, if the elements of this, creating a 3D printer work, then I understand the idea is patented, but that shouldn't stop someone from modifying it or making their own version of it. So I think that line is really foggy.
Yeah, there's an interesting phenomenon, that happens in technology, because technology is being developed so fast and so rapidly that people have to sort of stop and think about it after the fact, right? So then you look at the most famous guy, most famous crook in the world, Bill Gates, started his company by stealing other people's stuff, changing it a little bit, and now he's the guy, and he's been the guy for a long time, right? So I think this is an example of 3D Systems saying, hold on, stop. We want to make sure that this doesn't happen because it has happened before, so we want this. This is our invention. This is for us. Was an interesting interesting afternoon to think about is that 3D Systems also took Kickstarter to court as well for having this Form Labs company broadcast their campaign on their website, which is an illegal campaign. So there's businesses going after the sort of grassroots funding as well, and that doesn't seem right either. So I'm with you, Margo. Like, just give it up. Who cares?
And if you want to learn more about this whole patent war thing, there's an episode of This American Life called When Patents Attack. And it's a great explanation of how this patent thing has become less about protecting people's inventions and more about this just legal morass that is paralyzing innovation. It's not cool.
No, certainly not. Lauren, I'm going to need your help with this last one. I read it. I seen there was a lot of great stuff in here, but I didn't quite understand it. Tell me about what it means to fail great.
Excellent. So this is an article from 2amtheater.com by Pete Miller. And it's called Failgreat, Diversify Production Ideas. And the author here is talking about how we can apply this idea of a fail-safe to theater. A fail-safe is this idea that if a machine fails, it fails in a way that does the least amount of harm to everything around it. And he has taken that and translated it into what he calls Failgreat, which is a philosophy of art creation, by which we make art in a way that even if the project or the entire organization fails, it fails in a way that's obvious both to the observer and to the individual who created it that you were striving for greatness in your moment of failure. What do you guys think? I think this is really a powerful philosophy for us.
I think there's no way to tell if you're looking at a failure on stage if it was great or if it was terrible when it failed. I was like, well, that sounds really uplifting. But if I am watching a piece of theater and I'm like, that is trash, how do I know if they were striving for greatness or if it was always terrible?
That's fair, but I mean, can you appreciate the philosophy of creating an environment where it's okay to fail because we're trying to make the next great thing? We're trying to make an environment where it's okay to fail in pursuit of great theater.
That doesn't seem like a successful, like, modus operandum. Like, it doesn't seem like let's, change theater and get new people into the seats and build audiences and do better work by taking bigger risks. That seems like counterintuitive to me. Like, no, we want to stop doing that and let's just do Hello Dolly. And
that's what he
okay.
talks about, though. He says, if we're going to make any significant change in the theater, we can't keep doing Hello Dolly. We have to go to the place where we're feeling uncomfortable, where we feel like we might fail.
I think I am all for risk, and I think it's necessary. And I think the idea of diversifying productions is really important. But I think that this is not a realistic. This is saying if you fail, people will still respect you, and sometimes that's not true. Sometimes people will judge you for your failure. I'm so sorry I'm pounding the table, but people will judge you for your failure, and you have to be willing to risk that, because if there is no risk, then...
But that's the point of the article. I mean, that's what he's... I didn't like this article when I first read it, and now I like the second half of it. I disagree with the first half, which we can talk about in a sec. But the second half about Failgreat, I think it's what theater has to be. I think otherwise... we're just kind of sitting there and we're watching, Hello
but
Dolly.
I think it is wishful thinking to think that people will look at something that has failed and say, but at least they tried.
But that's not the point.
But the point isn't that
what is the point?
The point is that
we have
your company, the point is that whoever does this thing that has failed has to know that they did something that they felt was worthwhile and that they were trying to accomplish something.
That we cannot be afraid of failing.
Right. That you shouldn't let failure stop you from doing this crazy idea that you suddenly have because you think it's going to be the next big thing. And maybe it's not, and maybe it's going to crash and burn, and you're going to lose all your money, and it sucks. But at the same time, that's what pushed theater forward. Like, that's what has to be there in order to make theater, relevant 50 years from now.
Yeah, I think what I object to about this is his line that he says, organizations that innovate fail often, but when they fail in the midst of striving toward a worthy goal, that failure is more often praised and valued than looked down upon. And I think that is not true.
Okay, but we need to create an environment where it is. That's the point.
That would be lovely.
The environment that we have now looks at a failed show and says, that sucked, and they judge you for it. You're right. But we need to create an environment where failure is okay, and that's the point.
And I mean, what he talks about in the beginning, which I don't necessarily agree with, I don't think, is that these big, established theater institutions need to help the struggling, smaller, new, innovative, theater company that's just sprung up in their city, and need to foster that, because that's the only way that this environment can exist.
Right, and that's why it doesn't, right? Because so if anyone followed sort of the blogosphere 2 years ago, there was this Occupy Lincoln Center thing that was going around, which was like, why is Lincoln Center and companies like that getting all the money, and why aren't Margo, what's your theater company?
Prologue. Why
aren't they getting all the money? They do great stuff too, right? So I don't know, but it doesn't. I think we can't. I think we need to change things before we embrace this. I don't think we can embrace this and say this will change the environment. I think there's a bigger change which needs to trickle down to get to this.
Yeah, but how do we get to that next step? How do we get away from Hello Dolly? Like, where's the next thing going to come from if we're not willing to take that risk?
The idea that larger companies, because what he argues is that smaller companies are doing all of this diverse and innovative work. We're the people who are risking, because if you have more to lose, if you're at the Goodman Theater in Chicago and you fail, you've lost more money than Prologue does if no one comes to our show, because, you know, our budget is much smaller. But the idea that in order for theater to be healthy, those who are getting these $1 million grants need to help the ecosystem, because diversity is what makes a good ecosystem. If you have an ecosystem that's made up of grass and antelope and something happens to the grass, you are screwed. So you need an ecosystem that is more diverse, so that it can be healthy, and it is the responsibility, he is arguing, it seems, of larger companies to sort of help these smaller companies who are already doing this work to innovate. I am not clear about his connection from like the health of the ecosystem to failing really well.
I mean, I think he's saying that if the theater ecosystem is healthy, there's an environment in which failure is okay. Because, you know, this small theater company can take a risk and maybe fail, but the larger theater companies then can like have that, you know, environment stable enough that it's okay for them to not succeed all the time.
I would love to live in that world, but I just feel like Pete Miller, this is a very sort of like, you know, rose-colored glasses sort of situation where we're saying that there is not, your company is not going to fall apart and you're not going to lose all your money if you fail.
It's a great idea to strive for.
I'll agree with that.
Okay.
I can sign on to that.
Thank you.
I don't think it's the world we're living in right now. I think it's okay. I think we absolutely should take risks with our art and be vulnerable.
Yes.
And all that great stuff. But I think it's naive to think that there will not be consequences. Sometimes terrible consequences.
I also think it's a little bit of this guy sort of regurgitating that Beckett quote that everyone misquotes about failing better. Like, stop it. Like, you know, you're not being cute. Like,
you're not Samuel Beckett.
Exactly. Like, we get it, right? So that's all the time we have for this week. If you're on Twitter, let us know what you think. Use the hashtag NFTRW. The articles we've talked about today can be found at the link at the bottom of this video, so check it out. Take a look for yourself. That's what we got for today. So if you like what you see, tell your friends. If you don't like what you see, tell your enemies. All right. Thanks, guys. Hello and welcome to the News from the Real World video podcast. No, I'm not. Okay. There's a term in the theater, Kat. It's called a rehearsal. I'm running lines right now.